When the shooting stopped, thousands of soldiers were still waiting for orders that would never come. The roads behind them were gone. Supplies had stopped arriving, and retreat was no longer an option. They had done exactly what they were told. They had held their positions. No reckless attack caused this. No sudden collapse at the front. It started with a decision that looked safe. In the early days of World War II, commanders believed that control was everything. Controlled movement, controlled lines, controlled decisions. Disorder was feared almost as much as the enemy itself. The memory of the First World War was still fresh, a war where panic and uncontrolled retreats had turned defeat into slaughter. So when pressure mounted, the instinct was simple: stay where you are. Holding ground felt responsible. It kept units connected, it maintained supply routes, it avoided chaos. From headquarters, it looked like discipline. On the ground, it felt like obedience. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Soldiers dug in, defensive positions were reinforced. Patrols reported enemy activity, but nothing alarming. The front still existed. The map still made sense. Then small things began to change. Supply trucks were late. Not missing, just late. Radio messages became shorter and less clear. Units on the flanks reported contact where none was expected. Roads that had been open days earlier were suddenly, temporarily unavailable. Still, the order remained. Hold position. Officers trusted it. They had no reason not to. Withdraw without orders was unthinkable. Moving on your own meant risking friendly fire, losing coordination, or exposing neighboring units. Staying put felt safer than improvising. That was the logic, but war was no longer moving at the speed commanders expected. Enemy forces were not advancing evenly across the front. They were moving around it. Columns appeared behind positions thought secure. Communication lines were cut without warning. What looked like isolated incidents were actually parts of a larger movement. By the time this became clear, the battlefield had already changed shape. The enemy was no longer just in front. They were behind, on the flanks, on the roads that led home. Still, no withdrawal order came. From higher command, the situation looked confusing but manageable. Reports contradicted each other. Some units claimed to be holding. Others reported heavy contact. Reconnaissance was incomplete. Maps lagged behind reality. Issuing a retreat order felt dangerous. It risked panic, it risked collapse. And without a clear picture, it felt premature. So the safest choice was to wait. That waiting cost thousands of lives. On the ground, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Ammunition was rationed. Medical evacuation slowed, then stopped entirely. Wounded soldiers remained in field positions longer than planned. Morale dropped as rumors spread faster than official information. Men began to realize something was wrong, not with the fighting, but with the silence. They were still receiving orders to hold positions that no longer mattered. When local commanders finally attempted limited withdrawals on their own initiative, they discovered the truth. Roads were blocked. Enemy units controlled key intersections. Attempts to move became firefights. Units that tried to pull back piecemeal were cut apart. What had once been a defensive line had turned into a pocket, a trap built not by aggression, but by stillness. The soldiers inside it fought hard. There was no lack of courage. They resisted attacks, repelled assaults, and held ground far longer than expected. But courage cannot replace supply lines, and discipline cannot substitute for mobility once encirclement begins. Every hour made escape harder. At higher levels of command, the picture finally sharpened, but too late. The scale of the situation became clear only after options had disappeared. The safe decision had removed flexibility. There was no clean withdrawal left to order. What followed was not a single moment of collapse, but a slow, grinding end. Breakout attempts were planned under pressure, with limited coordination. Some units escaped. Many did not. Others fought until ammunition ran out, then destroyed their equipment to prevent capture. Thousands were killed. Thousands more were taken prisoner. Entire formations ceased to exist, and all of it traced back to a decision that had been made calmly, deliberately, and with good intentions. The most disturbing part was not that the decision failed. It was that it made sense. The commanders who made it were not reckless. They were not incompetent. They were trying to avoid disaster, to prevent panic, preserve order, and buy time. But the enemy they faced did not need panic. They needed hesitation. Speed had replaced mass. Movement had replaced static defense. And decisions designed for an earlier kind of war were now deadly. By the time the lesson was learned, the men on the ground had already paid for it. This was not a story of cowardice or betrayal. It was a story of how caution, when misunderstood, can be lethal, and how a decision that looks safe can quietly remove every path to survival. The disaster did not begin with an explosion or a charge. It began with an order to stay put, and that is why this decision matters, because it would not be the last time in the war that safety was mistaken for control, and control for survival. When the order to hold position was first issued, it did not sound like a death sentence, it sounded temporary. In the opening weeks of the campaign, higher command believed the situation was fluid but recoverable. Enemy advances were fast, but not yet decisive. The front still existed on paper, and as long as units remained in place, commanders believed they could stabilize it. This belief hardened into policy. On May 12, 1940, as German armored forces pushed deeper through unexpected routes, reports reached headquarters describing rapid enemy movement behind forward positions. Some officers warned that flanks were becoming dangerously exposed. Others urged caution, arguing that pulling units back too early could trigger panic. The decision was made to wait. That choice seemed reasonable in the moment. Retreat required coordination. It needed clear routes, secure rear areas, and reliable communications, none of which were guaranteed. Holding position, by contrast, required no movement at all. And so the order stood. As days passed, the battlefield began to change faster than command structures could respond. German units did not press forward evenly. They bypassed strongpoints, leaving pockets of resistance behind while racing toward strategic objectives. To commanders trained in earlier doctrines, this was deeply unsettling. Traditional thinking assumed that enemy forces would consolidate gains before advancing further. That pockets left behind could be dealt with later. That lines mattered, they no longer did. By May 14, bridges over key rivers had fallen into enemy hands far sooner than expected. Supply convoys attempting to reach forward units encountered roadblocks or enemy patrols where friendly forces had been reported just hours earlier. Still, no general withdrawal order was issued. From headquarters, the picture remained incomplete. Some units reported success holding their ground. Others reported contact but not disaster. Reconnaissance flights failed to capture the speed of enemy movement on the ground. In this fog, retreat seemed like an overreaction. Commanders feared the consequences of acting too soon more than the consequences of waiting too long. On the ground, officers began to sense the danger before it was acknowledged above them. Patrols returned with alarming reports. Enemy units were seen moving laterally rather than forward. Columns appeared in villages believed to be well behind the lines. Local commanders requested permission to reposition. They were told to hold. The logic was consistent. Maintaining cohesion was more important than reacting to scattered reports. Moving without orders risked fragmentation. Fragmentation meant collapse. Ironically, it was the refusal to move that caused exactly that. By May 16, supply problems became undeniable. Ammunition deliveries slowed, fuel shortages appeared. Medical evacuation routes grew unreliable. Units reported wounded men waiting hours, then days for evacuation that never came. Morale suffered quietly at first. Soldiers are trained to endure hardship. Delays happen. Supplies arrive late, orders change. But as conditions worsened, it became clear that this was not temporary friction. It was systemic. Still, the front did not break, in a dramatic sense. There was no single line giving way, no mass rout. Units continued to fight, often effectively. Enemy attacks were repelled. Positions were held. From above, this looked like success. In reality, it was a trap closing slowly. By the time higher command seriously considered withdrawal, the situation had changed fundamentally. What would have been a controlled retreat days earlier had become a race against encirclement. On May 18, reports confirmed what many on the ground already knew. Enemy forces had reached key road junctions and river crossings behind the front. Communication lines were severed. Units were now relying on couriers rather than radio. The battlefield had folded inward. Orders began to shift, but cautiously. Limited withdrawals were authorized. Repositioning was permitted where necessary. No general breakout was ordered. Commanders still hoped the situation could be stabilized locally. That hope vanished quickly. As some units attempted to pull back, they ran into enemy formations already in place. What had been a theoretical risk became a deadly reality. Columns moving in daylight were ambushed. Night movements collided with enemy patrols. Confusion reigned. Withdrawal without coordination proved just as dangerous as holding position. The soldiers caught in the middle paid the price. By May 20, entire formations were effectively surrounded. Supplies ran dangerously low. Artillery units rationed shells. Infantry conserved ammunition. Food shortages became severe. Wounded men were treated with dwindling medical supplies. Yet orders continued to arrive, often delayed, sometimes contradictory, sometimes impossible to execute. Hold here, withdraw there, counterattack tomorrow. Each instruction reflected a command system struggling to keep up with events it no longer controlled. The most devastating aspect of the decision to hold was not that it failed tactically, it failed temporally. Time was the one resource the trapped units did not have. Every hour spent holding position under the assumption that relief would arrive was an hour the enemy used to tighten the encirclement. By the time breakout attempts were authorized in earnest, the enemy was ready. German units anticipated them. Artillery was positioned. Armor blocked likely escape routes. Air support harassed any movement in the open. Attempts to coordinate multiple breakouts collapsed under communication failures. Some units broke through. Many did not. The fighting during these breakout attempts was brutal. Soldiers advanced knowing the odds were poor. Columns moved under fire, abandoning heavy equipment to gain speed. Wounded were left behind. Officers destroyed radios and maps before capture. Those who survived often did so by chance rather than planning. By the end of the operation, tens of thousands were dead or missing. Even more were taken prisoner. Entire divisions ceased to exist as fighting formations. From a distance, historians would later argue about alternatives. What if withdrawal had been ordered earlier? What if commanders had acted on incomplete intelligence? What if risk had been accepted sooner? But those questions miss the core issue. The decision to hold position was not irrational. It was rooted in experienced discipline and a desire to avoid chaos. It followed doctrine. It felt responsible. That is why it was repeated, again and again, and each repetition made escape harder. The tragedy was not that commanders refused to think. It was that they trusted a concept of safety that no longer applied. As the war continued, similar decisions would be made elsewhere, sometimes with different outcomes, sometimes with the same deadly result. But this case became a lesson written in blood that in fast-moving wars, stillness can be fatal. The men who died did not die because they were defeated in battle. They died because the battlefield moved, and they were ordered not to. By the time the order changed, the war had already passed them by. By the time the last organized resistance inside the pocket ended, the outcome was no longer in doubt. What remained was survival. For the soldiers still holding out, the war had narrowed to a few basic concerns: ammunition, food, and the hope that capture would come before annihilation. Units that had once counted their strength in battalions now counted it in handfuls of men. Officers who had issued confident orders weeks earlier now focused on keeping wounded alive and preventing panic in the final hours. The collapse did not come with a single dramatic moment. It came quietly. Artillery fire slowed, not because the fighting had eased, but because there were fewer guns left to fire. Radio traffic fell silent as batteries died or sets were destroyed. White flags appeared in places where resistance could no longer be sustained. Thousands were taken prisoner. Others lay where they had fallen, uncounted until long after the front had moved on. From the outside, the destruction of these trapped forces appeared sudden. From the inside, it felt painfully slow. For higher command, the scale of the loss became clear only after the fighting ended. Reports arrived listing units that no longer existed. Supply requests went unanswered because there was no one left to receive them. Entire sections of the order of battle had vanished. The question was unavoidable. How had this happened? In the days and weeks that followed, explanations emerged quickly. Commanders spoke of poor communications, unexpected enemy speed, and unreliable intelligence. All of these were true, but none of them were new. War had always involved uncertainty. What had changed was the tempo. The battlefield no longer waited for decisions. In earlier wars, holding ground had often been a sensible response to pressure. Time could be used to reinforce, reorganize, or negotiate. Fronts moved slowly enough that hesitation did not immediately become fatal. That was no longer the case. The enemy had learned how to exploit stillness. By bypassing strongpoints instead of destroying them, they turned discipline into immobility. Units that followed orders perfectly became obstacles to their own survival. The decision to hold position did not fail because it was stupid. It failed because it belonged to a different kind of war. This realization came too late for the men who paid the price. Many of those captured would spend years in prison camps. Others would not survive captivity. Families would receive delayed or incomplete notifications. Some would never learn exactly where their sons, brothers, or husbands had died. For them, the decision was not theoretical, it was final. In the years after the war, military historians would dissect the campaign endlessly. Maps were redrawn, timelines reconstructed, alternative decisions proposed. Some argued that earlier withdrawal would have saved lives. Others insisted it would have caused collapse anyway. But beneath those debates lay a simpler truth. The decision looked safe because it felt familiar. Commanders trusted what they understood. They feared chaos more than encirclement. They believed discipline could compensate for speed, and for a brief moment, it almost did. The danger of such decisions is not that they are obviously wrong. It is that they delay recognition of failure until recovery is no longer possible. By the time the order to move was given, movement itself had become impossible. This pattern would repeat throughout the war. At different fronts, under different flags, commanders would again choose to hold ground because it seemed safer than withdrawal. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But the underlying lesson remained the same: safety is not defined by stillness. True safety lies in preserving options. Once options are gone, courage and discipline can only determine how long defeat takes, not whether it can be avoided. The men caught in this decision were not sacrificed intentionally. They were trapped by inertia. Their deaths were not the result of malice but of timing. And that is what makes this story uncomfortable, because if placed under the same pressure, with the same information, many leaders would make the same choice again. Hold position, wait for clarity, avoid panic. Those instincts are human, but war punishes delay. The battlefield does not pause for certainty. The lesson of this decision is not simply military. It extends beyond maps and formations. It speaks to leadership under pressure, to the danger of mistaking calm for control and caution for wisdom. Sometimes the most dangerous choice is the one that feels safest. And sometimes, by the time that becomes clear, the cost has already been paid. Thousands of lives paid it here, not in a reckless charge, not in a desperate gamble, but in silence, while waiting for an order that came too late.